a blower sticking straight out of the hood like a mechanical fist. Black paint so deep it swallowed the Australian sun whole. An engine note so violent it sounded less like a car and more like a declaration of war. One machine that looked at the end of the world and said, "Yeah, I can work with this." Hi, my name is Johnny, and this is American Muscle, the show where we chase down the real stories behind the cars that made history and find out where they ended up. Today we're going after the one that started it all, the Pursuit Special, the last of the V8 Interceptors. And what happened to it after the cameras stopped rolling is one of the strangest, most heartbreaking, and ultimately most remarkable stories in movie car history. Buckle up. The car itself. What was the Interceptor really? Before we talk about what happened to the Interceptor, we need to talk about what it actually was, because there is a version of this story that gets repeated constantly online, in forums, in comment sections, in YouTube videos, and most of it is either incomplete or flat out wrong. So let's start from the ground up. The car that became the Pursuit Special, the hero vehicle of the 1979 film Mad Max, began its life as a 1973 Ford Falcon XB GT Coupe. For anyone outside Australia, that sentence requires some translation. The Falcon XB was Ford's Australian muscle car, big, aggressive, built for roads that went nowhere fast, and powered in GT spec by a Cleveland Fiat 8. Not a Mustang, not a Camaro, not anything that an American audience in 1979 would have immediately recognized. It was distinctly, unapologetically Australian iron. The production company hired Peter Arcada-Payne, an automotive designer, to transform the donor Falcon into something that looked like it had been assembled at the end of civilization from whatever was left. The modifications were extensive. A custom nose extension stretched the front end, giving it that long, predatory snout that became iconic. A dummy supercharger, what the film would call the blower, was mounted through a cutout in the hood and connected to the engine bay in a way that looked functional, even though the setup was largely cosmetic. The blower that appears to be bolted directly to a massive V8 in the film is, in reality, a beautifully fabricated piece of theater. The engine underneath was real, and it was no joke, but the blower sitting proud through the hood was showmanship, Australian style. The bodywork received additional flares, custom exhausts running along the sides of the car, and a matte black finish over the original paintwork. Side exhausts, blacked out trim, a supercharger snout pointing at the sky. The result looked like something an engineer built in a nightmare. It looked, in other words, exactly right. One more thing worth knowing. The production built more than one car. The Interceptor the audience fell in love with in close-up shots, the hero car, was this modified XB Falcon. The stunt work involved other vehicles in various states of modification. That distinction is going to matter a lot later in this story, so keep it in the back of your mind. The world it came from. Mad Max. On no money and pure conviction. Now, here's the thing about Mad Max that most people only half understand. The film that introduced this car to the world was made on an almost insultingly small budget. We're talking roughly 400,000 Australian dollars. For context, the average Hollywood studio film at the time was spending 10 to 20 times that amount before they'd even finished casting. George Miller was a 20-something emergency room doctor from Sydney with no feature film experience and an idea that would not leave him alone. Byron Kennedy was his producing partner, equally young, equally convinced. The two of them essentially willed Mad Max into existence through sheer conviction and the willingness to do things that no professional production would have attempted. Like filming genuine highway chases on actual public roads in rural Victoria, because they could not afford to close them properly. Like using a camera car that was barely roadworthy. Like asking stunt performers to do things that would make a modern insurance underwriter faint outright. The result was a film that looked like it cost 10 times what it did. And the single biggest reason for that is the car. When you don't have the budget to build elaborate sets, when you can't afford Hollywood production design, when your locations are stretches of empty Australian highway and your cast is mostly unknowns, what you need is an object so visually powerful that the camera can simply point at it and the audience will believe everything. The Pursuit Special did that job. It carried the entire weight of the film's world on its black hood. Every time it rolled into frame, The audience understood something about this story without a single word of dialogue. This is the last functioning piece of a civilization that's already gone. This is what a man becomes when the system he served turns into the chaos it was supposed to prevent. Miller understood exactly what he had. He shot the Interceptor like it was a character, which it was. Close on the blower, low on the exhaust, wide on the empty road ahead. The car had its own cinematography, its own language, its own presence, and it cost $400,000. I want to say that again because it still gets me. $400,000. The budget of a modest Australian house renovation turned into one of the most influential films ever made. If that doesn't make you love cinema, I don't know what to tell you. On set, what the Interceptor actually did during filming. Now, let's get specific about what the Interceptor actually did during filming and what it was capable of doing, because there's a distinction here that matters. The hero car, the XB Falcon that had been modified by Arcata Payne and his team, was used for all the close-up work, the scenes where the camera needed to be intimate with the machine. Interior shots, low angles on the hood, any moment where the audience needed to feel like they were right there with it. This was the car that Mel Gibson sat in. This was the car the cinematographer lit. This was the car the production treated with the most care because it was irreplaceable. The chase sequences, the work that required speed and risk, and the genuine possibility of something going wrong involved other vehicles. This is standard practice in film production, and it was especially necessary on Mad Max because Miller and Kennedy were working with a skeleton crew in conditions that were, to put it generously, improvised. Legitimate stunt driving on public roads with cameras strapped to vehicles that had no business being camera platforms. The Interceptor itself was genuinely fast. The Cleveland Phoebe 8 under the hood was not decorative. But the production was not about to put the hero car into situations that could destroy it irreparably. They had one. That was it. What audiences saw on screen was the result of intelligent, resourceful filmmaking, stitching together the hero car's visual power with the practical chaos of vehicles being driven very hard on very real roads. The seamlessness of it is a tribute to Miller's direction and the editing, which gave the whole thing a kinetic, barely controlled energy that no studio film of the era could replicate because no studio film of the era was actually doing it for real. One more detail that doesn't get mentioned enough. The sound of the Interceptor in the film, that ground-shaking, teeth-rattling engine note, was enhanced in post-production. The actual car was loud. The car in the film is louder. Sound design doing what sound design does best, which is taking something real and making it mythological. The sequel problem, Beyond Thunderdome and the car's declining role. Then came the sequels, and this is where the story of the actual physical car starts to get complicated. Mad Max 2, released in 1981 and known in North America as The Road Warrior, brought the Interceptor back, but not for long. The whole point of the sequel's opening act is that the world has gotten worse, Max has gotten harder, and eventually the car he loved gets destroyed. The Road Warrior famously opens with a chase sequence that ends with the pursuit special being run off the road, rolled, and left as a burning wreck. Max walks away from it. The film walks away from it. The audience is meant to feel that loss as a statement about what the world has become. Here's the part that matters for our purposes. The car destroyed in that sequence was not the hero car from the first film. A different vehicle, modified to match the appearance of the original, was used for the destruction sequence. This is the same logic that governed the original production. You don't destroy the irreplaceable thing. You build a copy, make it look right, and you destroy that instead. So, the hero car from 1979 survived The Road Warrior. It survived Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome in 1985, where it doesn't appear at all because by that point the story had moved on entirely. And then the camera stopped, and the question became, what happens now? The answer, for a while, was nothing good. After the cameras stopped, the car enters the wilderness. After production on the original trilogy wrapped, the Interceptor entered what I can only describe as a period of institutional indifference. Nobody flagged it for preservation. No studio archivist pulled it aside. No one at the production company made a call to ensure that the most iconic vehicle in Australian film history was going to be cared for in any meaningful way. Sound familiar? If you've been watching this channel for any length of time, you know this is the pattern. The car that carried a film becomes, the moment filming ends, just a modified vehicle that costs money to store and nothing to sell. The Interceptor was displayed for a period in Australia following the release of the original film. It was a promotional asset, a piece of hardware you could point at and say, yes, this is real, this is what was in the movie. But promotional assets have a shelf life, and the shelf life of a 1973 Ford Falcon in the early 1980s was not particularly long. It was a used car dressed up as a movie prop. That's how the industry saw it. And then it left Australia entirely. The car was purchased by an American buyer and shipped across the Pacific to the United States. No fanfare, no ceremony, no acknowledgement that what was being loaded onto a container ship was an object of genuine cultural significance. It crossed an ocean the same way a piece of surplus equipment crosses an ocean, quietly, bureaucratically, without anyone writing it down in a way that would make historians happy. This is the part of the story that genuinely stings when you sit with it. The last of the V8 Interceptors left its home country in a shipping container, and almost nobody noticed. The American chapter. A museum, a mystery, and a legal mess. The American chapter of the Interceptor's story is where things get genuinely complicated. And I mean legally, documentarily, and in terms of what the car actually is by the time we're talking about it. The vehicle ended up on display in the United States, eventually landing at a museum in California. For years, it sat behind ropes as a static display piece, which is either the right ending for a car like this, or a profound indignity depending on how you feel about these things. Personally, a car built to move, built to run, built to sound like the apocalypse warming up in your driveway. Sitting still under fluorescent lights while tourists take photographs feels like a very specific kind of sadness. But at least it was being preserved. At least someone knew what it was. Then the ownership situation got murky. And when I say murky, I mean the kind of murky that requires attorneys. Over the years, questions arose about who actually had legitimate claim to the vehicle. The chain of ownership from the original Australian production through the American purchase through subsequent sales was not clean. Documentation was incomplete. Provenance records had gaps. And when you're talking about a vehicle that, by the time these questions were being asked, had become genuinely valuable as a cultural artifact, those gaps attract attention of the wrong kind. There were disputes, there were competing claims, there were legal proceedings. The details of the litigation are not fully public record, but the broad strokes are this. Multiple parties at different points believed they had a legitimate claim to the Interceptor, and the legal system was asked to sort it out. This is not unusual in the world of significant movie cars, where paperwork was an afterthought and values that seemed negligible in 1980 look very different in 2010. What makes the Mad Max situation particularly thorny is the question of authenticity that runs underneath all of it. Because here is the uncomfortable truth that any serious researcher has to confront when talking about the Interceptor. The car has been restored multiple times by multiple people with varying levels of access to original reference materials. Parts have been replaced, components have been rebuilt from scratch. The supercharger assembly that sits proud through the hood today is not the same assembly that was fabricated for the original 1979 production. The exterior has been repainted. Various mechanical components have been swapped out over decades of storage, transport, and display. This is not unique to the Interceptor. It happens to virtually every surviving movie car from this era. Cars are not paintings. You cannot simply lock them in a climate-controlled room and expect them to survive unchanged. They deteriorate. They need maintenance. They need parts. And every time a part gets replaced, a piece of the original object is gone. The philosophical question this raises, and I promise I'll stop being philosophical in a second, is what exactly are we preserving when we restore a movie car? Is it the object itself? Or is it the representation of what the object was? The Interceptor on display today is the Interceptor in the same way that a restored vintage aircraft is the original aircraft. The identity is continuous even if the materials are not entirely. Most people find that acceptable. Some people find it genuinely troubling. I'll let you decide which camp you're in. What I will say is this: the restoration work that has been done on the car, whatever its philosophical complications, has been carried out by people who took it seriously. People who watched the film frame by frame, took reference photographs, and attempted to return the car to its screen-accurate appearance with the same care that a master craftsman brings to any significant restoration. The intent was right, even when the original materials were gone. The restoration question: what is it now? Let's stay on the restoration question for a moment longer, because it's more important than it might seem, and it's the thing that serious collectors and Mad Max researchers argue about most passionately. When the Interceptor arrived in the United States, it was not in show-quality condition. Years of storage and transport had taken their toll. The body had suffered. The custom fabrication work that Arcadapani had done on the nose extension and the blower housing had deteriorated in ways that required significant intervention to correct. The paint was compromised. Interior components were missing or damaged beyond reasonable repair. The restoration that followed used the film itself as its primary reference document. Frame-by-frame analysis, production stills where they could be found, testimony from people who had been on the original production. This is the same methodology that Eddie Paul used when he rebuilt the Cobra Mercury stunt car, watching the film with a notepad and rebuilding from what the camera had recorded. It's a legitimate approach. It's the best approach available when original documentation is incomplete. What it cannot do is replace original material with original material. A rebuilt blower housing, however accurate in its dimensions and appearance, is not the blower housing that sat on that car in 1979. A repaint, however carefully color-matched to production stills, is not the original matte black finish. The car on display is an accurate representation of the screen-used vehicle. Whether that makes it the screen-used vehicle is a question that reasonable people answer differently. Here's my take, for what it's worth. The identity of a car like the Interceptor lives in its continuous history, not in any individual component. The chassis, the fundamental structure, the thing that makes it this car and not a replica, that's what matters. And from everything that can be documented, the structural core of the Hero Falcon XB from 1979 is in that display. The rest is maintenance. Expensive, careful, historically informed maintenance. But maintenance nonetheless. Where it lives today. So, where does the Interceptor actually live today? As of the time of this script, the hero car from Mad Max, the 1973 Ford Falcon XB GT that became the Pursuit Special, is on display at the Desert Collection in Florida, a private automotive museum that holds one of the more remarkable collections of screen-used vehicles in the United States. The car sits in a purpose-built display environment. It is, by all accounts, in show-quality condition. The blower is there. The side exhausts are there. The black paint is there. The silhouette that defined a genre and inspired every post-apocalyptic vehicle that followed it for the next 45 years is there. Is it the right home? That depends on who you ask. There are people in Australia who will tell you, with complete justification, that the most iconic vehicle in Australian cinema history belongs in Australia, that it should be in Sydney or Melbourne, not sitting in a private collection in Florida. That argument has real weight. The Interceptor is not just a movie prop. It is a piece of Australian cultural history that happened to also define a global genre. Putting it in a private American museum, I'll just say it, feels a little like finding out the actual Bayeux Tapestry ended up in someone's living room in Connecticut, technically preserved, arguably misplaced. What I'll say is this: it survived. After everything, it survived. The shipping container, the legal disputes, the restoration questions, the decades of institutional indifference. The car is still there. You can go see it. That is not nothing. That is, against all reasonable expectations, given how this industry treats its own history, actually quite a lot. The ones that got away, the other Falcons. Now, let's talk about the ones that didn't make it, because the hero car is only part of the story, and the rest of it is considerably darker. The production of Mad Max involved multiple vehicles: stunt cars, picture cars dressed to resemble the hero vehicle, and the Falcon that was sacrificed for the Road Warrior's opening destruction sequence. Most of these did not survive in any meaningful form. They were driven hard, damaged, repaired overnight, driven hard again, and eventually crossed a threshold from which no amount of patching could bring them back. Sound familiar? The production of Dirty Mary Crazy Larry operated the same way. Organized automotive carnage with a car hauler full of backups waiting in rotation. Mad Max just did it on an even tighter budget with even less margin for error. The Falcon destroyed at the start of the road, Warrior is gone. That one we know for certain. It did exactly what it was built to do, and it paid the price. You can see it burning in the first 10 minutes of the film, and that's the last anyone saw of it in one piece. For years, rumors have circulated in Australian muscle car circles about surviving production vehicles from the original Mad Max hiding in rural sheds and private collections, unknown to their owners, unrecognized for what they are. The barn find mythology is as alive in Australia as it is anywhere else, and XB Falcon GTs of the right specification have surfaced over the years in various states of decay and modification. Whether any of them have a genuine documented connection to the original production is a harder question that the available paperwork cannot definitively answer. What can be said is this: if a matching production Falcon is sitting in a shed somewhere in Victoria right now, its owner is sitting on something worth a very serious conversation with a very serious auction house. The comment section is open. You know what to do. Here's what I keep coming back to when I think about the full arc of this story. George Miller made Mad Max for $400,000. He built a car that defined a genre. He created a visual language for civilizational collapse that filmmakers are still borrowing from in 2025. Here's what I keep coming back to when I think about the full arc of this story. George Miller made Mad Max for $400,000. He built a car that defined a genre. He created a visual language for civilizational collapse that filmmakers are still borrowing from in 2025. The Fury Road version of the Interceptor, built 40 years later for the 2015 film, is a direct conversation with the original. Mad Max himself is still reaching for the same blower, the same black hood, the same mechanical statement that the world ended and this is what survived. And the car that started all of that left Australia in a shipping container with no fanfare, spent years in legal limbo, got restored by people working from film stills, and ended up in a private museum in Florida. That's the story. That's how this goes. The machines that define our cultural mythology get treated like surplus inventory right up until the moment someone realizes what they threw away. And then the lawyers show up and the restorers show up, and everyone does their best with what's left. The last of the V8 Interceptors survived, partially through luck, partially through the dedication of people who understood what they had, and partially because the original build was solid enough to persist through everything the decades threw at it. That XB Falcon was real Australian iron built to last. And it did. It's in Florida now, the blower's pointing at the sky. If you're ever in the area, go see it. Because whatever questions you might have about restoration philosophy and provenance chains and institutional indifference when you're standing in front of that car, all of that falls away. It just looks like the end of the world. And somehow, against all reasonable expectations, it's still here. Drop a comment below. Do you think the Interceptor belongs back in Australia? And if you want more deep dives exactly like this one, subscribe to American Muscle. We find the cars, we tell the story, and we'll see you in the next lane.